She was 14. He was 24, and already the king of rock and roll. Their meeting in a military base in quote, Germany would spark one of the most controversial, passionate, and ultimately heartbreaking love stories in entertainment history. This is not just a tale of fame and fortune. It's a story of obsession, transformation, love, and loss. A story where Graceland's golden gates couldn't keep out the darkness. Where screaming fans witnessed the romance but never saw the tears. And where the girl who became Priscilla Presley learned that loving a legend means losing yourself to become someone else's dream. The year was 1959, and Elvis Presley was serving in the U.S. Army, stationed in Freiburg, Germany. Already a global phenomenon, he'd left behind screaming teenagers, Hollywood contracts, and a music career that had shaken America to its core. But in a quiet military town, far from the neon lights of Memphis, fate orchestrated an encounter that would define both their lives forever. Priscilla Ann Wagner was just 14 years old, the stepdaughter of an Air Force officer, living a typical military family life in Wiesbaden. She was beautiful, with striking dark hair and eyes that seemed older than her years. But she was still very much a child navigating the complexities of teenage life in a foreign country. When a mutual friend mentioned that Elvis Presley wanted to meet her, she could hardly believe it. The Elvis Presley? The man whose voice made girls faint, whose hips scandalized television networks, whose face adorned a million bedroom walls. Their first meeting at his rented house in Bad Nauheim was surreal. Priscilla walked into a room filled with soldiers and hangers-on, everyone vying for the king's attention. But when Elvis saw her, something shifted. He was immediately captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her youth, her innocence, her doe-eyed wonder at his world. She represented something pure in the chaos of his fame, something untouched by the machinery of celebrity that had consumed his life since he was 20-1. They talked for hours that first night. Elvis played piano, sang gospel songs, and shared stories about his beloved mother Gladys, who had died just a year earlier. The grief was still raw, a wound that wouldn't heal. In Priscilla's presence, he found comfort, someone who would listen without judgment, without wanting something from him. For Priscilla, it was overwhelming and intoxicating. Here was the most famous man in the world, treating her not like a child, but like someone who mattered, someone special. Her parents were understandably hesitant. Their daughter was 14, dating a 24-year-old superstar. But Elvis was charm personified when he needed to be. He assured them his intentions were honorable, that he simply enjoyed Priscilla's company, that he would protect her reputation. He promised to have her home by curfew, to be a gentleman. And somehow, impossibly, they believed him, or perhaps they simply couldn't say no to Elvis Presley. The remaining months of his military service became a whirlwind courtship. They spent nearly every evening together at his house, always surrounded by his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, as they'd come to be known. They watched movies, listened to music, talked about philosophy and religion. Elvis shared his fears about returning to America, about whether his career could survive his absence. Priscilla listened, absorbed, adored. She was falling desperately in love with a man the whole world loved, but she needed to believe that what they shared was different. Special real dot when Elvis left Germany in March 1960. Both of them were heartbroken, but he made her a promise. "I'll send for you. Just wait for me." Priscilla returned to America with her family, settling in Austin, Texas, and tried to resume normal teenage life. But how could anything be normal after Elvis Presley? She went to high school, attended football games, did homework all while waiting for letters postmarked from Memphis, for late-night phone calls that made her heart race. The distance was torturous, the uncertainty even worse. Was he dating other women? Was he forgetting about her? The tabloids constantly linked him to Hollywood starlets, Nancy Sinatra, Anne Margaret, Juliet Prowse. Each photo felt like a knife wound, but Elvis didn't forget. The phone calls continued, sometimes lasting hours. He told her about his movies, his music, his loneliness despite being surrounded by people constantly. "You're the only one who really understands me, baby," he'd say. And Priscilla believed him with the intensity only a teenager in love can muster. She counted the days, crossed them off her calendar, wore the gifts he sent, a diamond ring, a puppy, clothes far more sophisticated than what her classmates wore. Finally, in 1962, Elvis convinced her parents to let her visit Graceland for Christmas. She was 17, still in high school, but the promise was she'd stay with Elvis's father Vernon and his wife proper chaperones. The reality was quite different. From the moment she arrived at the iconic mansion with its white columns and music note gates, she entered Elvis's world completely. Graceland wasn't just a house. It was a kingdom where Elvis was absolute monarch, where night became day because he slept during daylight hours, where his word was law and his entourage scrambled to fulfill his every whim. Priscilla was mesmerized and overwhelmed. The mansion was filled with gold records, exotic decor, and expensive furniture. There was a jungle room with a waterfall, television sets in every room, a fleet of Cadillacs in the driveway. Elvis showered her with attention, gifts, affection. He began molding her into his ideal woman, choosing her clothes, her hairstyle, her makeup. He wanted her hair darker, more voluminous, her skirts shorter, her eyes more dramatic. She obliged eagerly, seeing it as love, as his desire to make her perfect. The visit was supposed to last 2 weeks. It lasted longer, and then came another visit and another. By 1963, Elvis had convinced her parents to let Priscilla move to Memphis permanently to finish her senior year at Immaculate Conception Cathedral High School. She would live with Vernon and his wife, he promised. She would have a normal education. But everyone knew the truth. She was moving to Graceland to be with Elvis. To become Mrs. Presley waiting life at Graceland was glamorous and suffocating in equal measure. Priscilla attended school during the day while Elvis slept. At night, she was his constant companion, watching movies in his private theater, riding horses on the property, traveling to Vegas or California when he performed or filmed. She had everything money could buy, but very little freedom. Elvis was possessive, jealous, controlling. He didn't want her working, didn't want her having close friends outside his circle, didn't want her becoming independent. She was his perfect creation, his living doll, and she accepted this role because she believed it meant he loved her more than anyone else in the world. On May 1st, 1967, Elvis and Priscilla finally married in a private ceremony at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. She was 21. They'd been together for 8 years. The wedding was small, almost secret, organized by Colonel Parker with military precision. Priscilla wore a traditional white gown and beehive hairdo that would become iconic. Elvis wore a black tuxedo and paisley bow tie. They looked perfect Hollywood royalty at its finest. The photos went around the world. The king had finally made his queen official, but the fairy tale was already showing cracks. Elvis had delayed marriage for years, and Priscilla had begun to wonder if it would ever happen. Colonel Parker pushed for it, believing it was good for Elvis's image, good for business. Elvis agreed, but his heart wasn't entirely in it. The wedding felt rushed, almost obligatory. Their honeymoon was brief, just a few days before Elvis had to return to work, filming movies, recording albums, maintaining the empire. 9 months later, almost to the day, their daughter Lisa Marie was born on February 1st, 1968. Priscilla was overjoyed. She finally had a purpose beyond being Elvis's companion. Motherhood gave her something that was entirely hers, someone who needed her for herself, not because she looked a certain way or behaved according to someone else's specifications. Elvis was thrilled too, a father at 32, holding his tiny daughter with unexpected tenderness. For a brief moment, it seemed like they might become a normal family, but Graceland was never a normal home. Elvis's prescription drug use was escalating uppers to perform, downers to sleep, painkillers for various ailments. His entourage enabled everything, getting him whatever he needed, no questions asked. Priscilla watched helplessly as the man she loved disappeared behind medication and mood swings. He became more distant, more erratic. Some nights he was the charming, passionate Elvis she'd fallen for in Germany. Other nights he was a stranger, paranoid, angry, unreachable. The birth of Lisa Marie also changed their physical relationship. Elvis confessed he could no longer see Priscilla as a sexual being now that she was a mother, a Madonna, pure and untouchable like his own mother had been. Priscilla was confused and hurt. She was 22 years old, beautiful, full of life, but suddenly relegated to a different category in her husband's mind. The passionate romance that had sustained their relationship cooled into something more like companionship, affection without desire. Priscilla began to feel trapped. She'd given up her teenage years, her 20s, her entire identity to become Elvis's wife. She'd never had a career, never traveled alone, never made decisions without considering what Elvis wanted. She looked in the mirror and saw someone she didn't recognize, carefully constructed image that pleased everyone but herself. She loved Elvis deeply, but she was beginning to realize that love alone wasn't enough to sustain a marriage, where she felt more like a possession than a partner. The world still saw them as the perfect couple. But behind Graceland's gates, both Elvis and Priscilla were slowly drowning in loneliness, together yet utterly alone. In 1972, Priscilla made the most difficult decision of her life. She left Elvis. After 13 years together, after building her entire existence around him, she walked away. It wasn't a single moment that broke them, but rather an accumulation of years of loneliness, neglect, and lost identity. She'd started taking karate lessons and met her instructor, Mike Stone, who showed her attention and respect that Elvis no longer offered. It wasn't just about another man. It was about discovering she could exist outside of Elvis's shadow, that she had value beyond being the king's wife. Elvis was devastated. Despite his own affairs, despite the distance between them, he never imagined Priscilla would actually leave. She was supposed to be his constant, his anchor, his Scylla. The divorce was finalized on October 9, 1973, with both of them present in a Santa Monica courthouse. They emerged holding hands, presenting a united front to the cameras. The photo is striking in its sadness. Two people who still loved each other, but couldn't live together anymore. They agreed to share custody of Lisa Marie, and despite everything, they remained connected. Priscilla would call to check on Elvis, worry about his health, his drug use, his increasingly erratic behavior. Elvis would call her late at night, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, sometimes just wanting to hear her voice. Their love story hadn't ended with divorce papers. It had simply transformed into something more complicated, a bond that couldn't be severed despite their separation. On August 16, 1977, Priscilla received the call she'd been dreading for years. Elvis was dead at 42, found on his bathroom floor at Graceland. She rushed to Memphis, walked through those familiar rooms, now filled with grief and chaos, said goodbye to the man who'd been her whole world since she was 14. At his funeral, she stood with Vernon and Lisa Marie, their 9-year-old daughter, who would now grow up without her father Dot in the decades that followed. Priscilla became the guardian of Elvis's legacy. She transformed Graceland into one of America's most visited homes, opened museums, authorized documentaries and films, and ensured that new generations discovered the king's music. She built her own career acting in Dallas and the Naked Gun movies, becoming a successful businesswoman. She proved she was more than just Elvis's wife. She was Priscilla Presley, a formidable woman in her own right. But even now, decades later, when she speaks about Elvis, you can hear it, the love never completely faded. She loved him at 14, 21, 32, and beyond. He was her first love, her husband, her greatest joy and deepest heartbreak. Their story wasn't perfect, wasn't always healthy, but it was real. In a world that often sees celebrities as untouchable icons, Elvis and Priscilla's relationship reminds us that behind the fame are human beings with human hearts that break, just like everyone else's. She'll always be his Scylla, and he'll always be her Elvis. That's their story, beautiful, tragic, unforgettable. The love story of Elvis and Priscilla Presley transcends Hollywood romance. It's a testament to how love can shape us, change us, and remain with us even when the person is gone. Their journey from that fateful meeting in Germany to Graceland's halls teaches us about passion, sacrifice, and the courage it takes to find yourself again after losing yourself in someone else. Want to explore more legendary love stories that shaped music history? Subscribe to our channel for deep dives into the real lives behind the icons. Like this story? Share it with someone who believes in love that lasts beyond a lifetime. And tell us in the comments, do you believe Elvis and Priscilla were true soulmates? Or was their story a cautionary tale about fame and young love?